Don't worry, Danielle. For years, I used to get tithes at Christmas. Welcome to 2025. Okay, a few days ago, but we're here. Wonderful. 2025. I feel like I'm getting old. I think there are three ways that you know that you're getting old. The first is a loss of memory. The second is did I say I think I'm getting old? 2024. What kind of word would you use to describe 2024? Or maybe in general, what word would you use to describe the world we live in? Pick a word in your mind. Try and keep it church appropriate if possible. Certainly it's been an interesting time. I think one of the words that I would use to describe this time in the world would be complex. Yeah, the world is really complex. And it's interesting because you would think that with all the innovation and access to information that things would become much more simple. So I wanted to talk to you over the next couple weeks about the idea of simplicity. Now I want to say from the beginning, some of you are already uncomfortable because I said the words more simple. Let's just clear things up. Simpler and more simple are both grammatically okay. Right, Gwen? Oh, she's not weighing in. Here's my reasoning. You don't have to Google it. I think I'm telling you the truth. Simpler is technically accurate. If it's two words, you can add ER to it, but more simple is also okay. Guess I'm actually creating some complexity while talking about simplicity. Going over all this grammatical stuff. I didn't want to get emails. So we think things would be simpler, but lots of times they feel more complex. In fact, the things that promise to make our life more simple often create unexpected challenges, often create some kind of complexity. I think I told you this story before, but it bears repeating. When I send messages or make phone calls, I do it by talking to my phone. Recently added Brian Mannon, B-R-I-A-N, to my phone. A few weeks ago, I told my phone to call Brian, my son, B-R-Y-A-N. Apparently my phone can't spell. It should know which Brian I want. It called Brian Mannon. I'm calling him, I'm sending him text messages all the time. So you're out in the woods today hunting. How's that going so far? And I get a text back, not me. So I hope you have a safe drive home. Thank you, but I think that's not the person you want. So here's what I did. I changed in my phone from Brian to, I put his wife's phone, Heather, his wife's name, Heather, on that phone number, which now has created a whole complete complexity around that because now I don't know who I'm talking to. Is it Brian or is it Heather? There's some things we think will make our lives more simple, and they actually complicate things, maybe make it even a more tangled mess. I think I see it when it comes to managing and navigating romantic relationships. Dating worlds have become more and more complex, even though there's all these tools, online dating, and stuff like that. I remember one time my son Christian asked a girl to the prom by a text message. And I'm going, No, you're not doing that. You're gonna, well, no, Dad. If she says no, which I expect might happen, I'm just gonna send the text to somebody else. Taxes too. You would think it would be a lot easier. Instead, all the technology that's out there right now just has made it more difficult, more complex. I think it's our complexity bias. The idea is that we're naturally drawn to complex solutions for what we perceive as complex problems. I think you see it this time of year as people are making different health resolutions. You know, the idea of regular exercise and caloric restriction, that's pretty simple. But there's something about that 300-page book or that video series or that new diet that we're drawn to. We tend to like complexity, and I think that's probably true for us as we analyze 2024. But what about simple? What about the simple words of Jesus? So here's what I want to do. I want to take a look at the simple words of Jesus over the next couple of weeks. Simple. Notice I didn't say easy. Simple and easy, if you check, they're synonyms, but they're not the same thing. I think we can all agree that there are some things that are simple, but they're not easy. I wrote down a few things from some things that just happened to me over the last several weeks. Things that sound simple, but aren't easy. Like in the store, picking whatever line is the shortest. It sounds simple, right? But it's not easy. I always pick the longest line in the store. Always. My wife, Martha, there could be 45 people in that line, and somehow she's going to get to the register faster than I will, picking the one with 2 folks in it. Somehow. Simple but not easy. Or how about this? Somebody said to me this week, why don't you just put your phone down? It sounds simple, but you don't know what I'm doing on my phone. Here's another one. Why don't you just admit you're wrong? No kidding. You first. That sounds simple, but it's not easy. Stop snoring. I'm trying. I can't hear it. I don't know I'm doing it. I don't know how to turn it off. It sounds simple. It's not easy. You know, it's only a game. Don't be so upset. Yeah, sounds simple, but it's not easy. And there are a lot of things like this. And I think this is true of some of what we read in the gospel. Some of the teachings of Jesus. Some of it seems so simple, but not necessarily easy. But it is right. And so we're going to look at some examples of that today and maybe over the next 2 weeks. The simple words of Jesus. I wanted to start today in Matthew chapter 7. Please remember Matthew chapter 7. This is at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. One of the things I'd like to encourage you to do today and this week is to read over Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. Oh, it outlines a ton of Jesus' teaching. But remember, Matthew 7 is at the end of all of this teaching. We're going to just kind of look at the conclusion of the sermon that Jesus has been preaching. If you read the sermon, you'll see what Jesus is doing is giving people a lens through which to look at life, a foundation for them to build their life on. This is what it looks like for the kingdom of heaven, to live for the kingdom. It's not super complicated. What Jesus taught was simple, and he showed us how to apply it. Then he used some stories to help people unpack it and understand it. And so he ends this Sermon on the Mount with this very simple parable, actually kind of two parables. But they're each only a couple sentences long. So when you see this, what I think we need to do is we need to line these two stories up next to each other, and we want to figure out where they're the same, and we want to highlight where they go in different directions. Pretty simple. So here's Matthew 7, verses 24 and 25. It starts with the word therefore. Remember that word for later, therefore. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. Sort of second story. Next verse, 26-27. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. So what do we see here? They both hear the words of Jesus. They're both in church. They're both listening to the sermon. They're both reading out of the same book. They're both in the audience. They all heard the Sermon on the Mount. And at the first person, he put it into practice. (26 and 27) again. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. It's really not complicated. It's pretty simple. I'm going to make a few observations of how these two stories connect. One is that everyone built a house. Both builders build a house. Idea is everyone. All of those listening to the words of Jesus are building a house. And of course, in this story, house is a metaphor for life. Everyone builds a life. Whether you want to or not, you're building. One part of living is building your life. Everybody builds a life. So how do we do that? How do we build a life? I like to think of a large brick house. Large house, safe. Big brick house like that usually consists of around 25,500 bricks. I want you to have that picture in your mind of each brick in a 25,500 brick house. And think of each brick of the house representing a decision that you make throughout the course of the year. There's a Columbia researcher who says that, according to her study, we make 70 decisions every day. 70 decisions a day. A lot of those are subconscious, meaning they're just sort of habitual. We did them yesterday, we'll do them today, we'll do it tomorrow. But still, there's about 70 decisions we're going to make today. And if we do the math on that, about 25,500 bricks a year, that's how many make up a house you build in the course of a year. Each decision is a brick in the house we're building. If you do the math on this, 25,500 bricks a year, by the time you're 80, is over 2 million decisions that you've made. Now, ultimately, your life consists of 2 million decisions that you made, whether you wanted to do that or not. That's just how it's going to work. Author Gloria Rubin wrote a book on habits. I like her language. She talks about how a lot of these decisions are actually just habits that we accumulated. She calls it the invisible architecture of daily life. And she says this just happens. We repeat about 40% of our behavior almost daily. So our habits shape our existence and our future. It is the inevitable architecture of daily life. And it's the little things we do consistently that end up having a pretty determinative effect on what we're building, whether we want them to or not. So both builders build a house. Second thing that you see in this story is that they have in common is they both face a storm. Everybody builds a house. Every house will face a storm. It's true of you, it's true of me. Notice that the description in these two stories is identical when it comes to the storm. Both verse 25 and 27, same thing. Verse 25, the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Verse 27, the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. It's going to be true for you, it's going to be true for me. I think that the Bible makes it clear that this isn't just true for people who know Jesus, but it's true for people who don't know Jesus as well. The difference is what kind of house they built. But every house is going to face a storm. Rain falls on the just and the unjust. Passage says the rain comes, and maybe that's where the bitterness starts to build up. Your position at work is eliminated. The political candidate you thought was going to make it all right, they didn't get elected. The streams rise. Like you can't seem to get ahead financially. You take some strides, but the water's still rising. Your singleness didn't seem like a problem a few years ago, but now it's starting to feel like it's a constant burden that you carry. The streams rise. Your kids, your grandkids, they can't seem to turn things around. They just don't get it. And the wind blows. An affair is discovered. Cancer is diagnosed. A new virus is spreading. People are sick all the time. The economy keeps tanking, and so does your retirement. And it's just life. We all face storms. For some of you, 2024, I don't know, maybe it was a light sprinkle of rain. There were some things bad, but not real bad. Others of you feel like you went through several Category 5 hurricanes. In fact, I think maybe you began to name your hurricanes as a way to keep track of them, because there's so many happening at once. And it might just happen that some of the names you give your hurricanes correlate with real people in your life, but I think that's only a coincidence. I didn't plan it that way, but there's just a lot happening, one thing after another, and I just feel overwhelmed. Every house faces a storm. So that's what happens in Matthew 7. What we discover is the storm will reveal what your house is made. Folks, storm reveal the foundation your house is built on. They do. So when suddenly you go through something difficult or hard, if you've been living your life on something built on other than Jesus, it tends to surface. And some of you could tell that story in a very personal way. And maybe you're with somebody and they've built their life on something other than the foundation of Jesus. And the storms come, excuse me, and you're in a house that is collapsing. Or for some, maybe you just discovered that you didn't realize you were building on the wrong foundation until the storm came. I think a lot of people have experienced this in the last few years. You just kind of step back and watch people who just feel overwhelmed with anxiety. It's because oftentimes the house they built is not standing up to the storms. and they're not sure what to do because they just never really even thought about it. Maybe they just started to build. They just started building, and now the storms come and it's exposed the foundation and it isn't good enough. And so I think the question to wrestle with, to think through as we start this new year is, what foundation are you building your household on? And there's no non-answer. Everyone is building a house, and every house has storms, and every house has a foundation. I suppose perhaps the most dangerous place to be is unaware. When I ask that question, the person says, I really don't know. You don't really know the foundation you're building your life on. You don't know the lens you're using to see the world, to make decisions. You're just sort of letting it happen. What foundation are you building your house on? Because folks, it matters. It doesn't matter how impressive the house is if it's not built on the right foundation. Jesus talks about the wise builder who builds on the rock, and he defines it by putting his words into practice. The foolish builder listens to his words, but didn't align the lives with the stuff that he taught. I was reading about a test that was conducted by an institute. It's called the Institute for Business and Home Safety. They're in Richburg, South Carolina. Here's what the researchers did. They built 2 separate houses, identical looking houses, each of them 1,300 square feet, and they built them inside this $40 million controlled environment. The first house that they built was built by all the right standards, filing all the business plans and requirements, all the business code, building codes. The second house that they built was the exact same, except they used reinforcement straps to connect the house to the foundation. Every part of the house was connected to the foundation, including the roof. And then they turned on these huge fans that produce winds, 110 mile an hour, Category 3 hurricane winds. First they turned the fans on for 3 minutes. Both houses came out okay. Little cosmetic damage, but they were fine for 3 minutes. Then the next experiment they did, they turned the fans on at 110 miles an hour for an hour. At 10 minutes, the house built regular began to be torn apart. At 20 minutes, it collapsed. The other house that had its parts bound to the foundation after 20 minutes had some cosmetic damage, but structurally it was good. And maybe that's where you are now. We've experienced some storms in life, maybe 3-minute storms, and we did okay. We made it out all right, but then the storm just kept raging. And it went from 3 minutes to 4 minutes, and suddenly it's 20 minutes. And things are shaking and things are collapsing. One of the researchers, an engineer named Tim Reingold, was trying to explain some of the data, some of the metrics that came out of these studies, because it seems simple, right? He summed up his feelings by asking, in which house would you rather be living? I think that's the point that Jesus is making. He's saying there are 2 ways to live your life. You can build your house on the foundation of Scripture, on what Jesus says, or you can go your own way. But the storm is coming, and when the storm comes, you just need to decide which of these houses you want to be living in. Matthew 7:24 again says, Jesus says, therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And he is the rock. His teaching used to place every brick Is teaching used as a lens in which to make decisions to build your life? It's not going to be based on what other people are saying. It's not going to be based on what is culturally popular. That's not it. It's going to be based on the words of Jesus. And I think that's what we do together here. That's our commitment as a church in 2025. It is together build our homes, our houses, our lives on this firm foundation. We take the words of Jesus and we apply them to our lives, and we help each other and we encourage each other and we challenge each other, and we pay attention to one another's foundation because it matters. It matters for eternity. Now look, I get it that no one gets excited about a foundation. Why? Because you can't see it. We all know people who ignored the foundation and they said, yeah, everything was fine and good. In fact, you might have looked at their lives or them on social media and said, that's the kind of house I want. That's the kind of life I want to live. And then the storm came, and their forever is exposed. Jesus had a word for the person who builds their house on a bad foundation. He uses the word fool. Interesting word. He didn't say evil, he didn't say wicked, he said fool. You don't have to do something evil or wicked. You just have to not pay attention now. If you say to a fool, well, why would you build this incredible house on this bad foundation? The fool would say, well, I didn't mean to. I didn't think we were going to get that kind of storm. Might say everybody else is doing it. Everybody else was building their life on that foundation. I thought I might as well. And it seemed okay. Everyone else was following the same standards. Why should I not follow that? It wasn't on purpose. I just never thought about it. It just kind of happened. Excuse me. Maybe a good way to describe a foolish life is that way, that it just happened. One of the saddest things for me as a pastor is to see people who spend decades building off the wrong foundation and nobody tells them. In fact, some even reinforce their building. Everybody looks at them and says, man, that's a nice house. They look at their lives on social media and went, man, that's the kind of life I want. I'd like to be retired too at that age. And they spend their whole lives and then they face this storm, and it's like no other storm. It's a storm called death. And it comes for us all. And when the storm of death is quickly approaching, people tend to recognize that their foundation may have been bad. So the question is, what's your foundation? What is the thing that you're building your life on? Is it a political platform? Is it your career? Is it financial portfolio? I hope it's good because you're betting the house on it. You're betting forever on it. I wanted to read to you Matthew 7:24 again. Remember I said, remember this word? It starts out, therefore. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Remember, this is the conclusion of Matthew 5, 6, and 7, what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Therefore is a connecting word. It's connecting to Jesus, the stuff he was teaching previous to that. Here's some of that stuff. Therefore, 7:1, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you'll be judged. And with the measure you use, it'll be measured to you. That sounds reasonable, right? It sounds like a firm foundation. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eyes and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your eye, your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. That's pretty solid, pretty good foundation. Verse 7, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, the door will be open. Jesus even applied an application here. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. Yeah, that's pretty foundational. Narrow and wide gates. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. There's only one way, and that's the rock. That's Jesus. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Another story. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus by their fruit you will recognize them. Foundation. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell you plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Storm is coming. On what foundation are you building? Folk, it has got to be the rock. It has got to be Jesus. It is the only way. Matthew 7:26 and 27. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. Folks, there's no fools here. Build on the rock. I think it's simple. We need to build on Jesus. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word and the truth of your word. Thank you for summing up this sermon, this teaching on the Mount. By asking us on what foundation we are building. Oh my God, we pray it has to be Jesus. Amen.